The boardroom smelled like fresh paint and expensive coffee, and Terrence Holt did not belong in either. He was 41 years old, a millwright by trade. The kind of man who knew the sound a conveyor belt made when it was about to fail 3 days before anyone else noticed. He had calluses on both hands, and a daughter named Abby who was 7, and who still slept with the lights on in the hallway. He had driven 40 minutes that morning to reach the Dunmore Industrial Park headquarters, and he had brought with him a folder of documents, a thermos of black coffee from home, and the quiet certainty that what he was about to present was worth presenting. He did not expect what happened next. Nadine Voss was 34, the newly appointed director of operations at Thornfield Manufacturing, a regional packaging company that had spent the last 2 years trying to rebrand itself as something sleeker, something modern. She had come from a consulting firm in Toronto, had never run a production floor in her life, and wore the kind of confidence that came from always having been in rooms where she was the smartest person, and no one had yet disagreed with her. She had reviewed Terrence's file before he arrived. She had already made up her mind. There were 4 people in the room when Terrence walked in. Nadine sat at the head of the table. Beside her was a young associate named Kevin, who took notes and never spoke. Across from them sat 2 men from the parent company's board, both in their 60s, both quiet. Terrence sat down and opened his folder. He had worked for Thornfield for 11 years. He had started on the floor, doing maintenance on the old press line, and had worked his way into a hybrid role, part senior technician, part informal systems analyst. He had never been given a formal title for the second part of that job. The company had benefited from it anyway. He placed a single page in front of each person at the table. It showed a breakdown of equipment downtime over the past 3 years, cross-referenced with the maintenance schedule he had redesigned in his second year. The numbers were not complicated. They did not need to be, he began to explain. Nadine let him speak for 4 minutes. Then she set down her pen. "Terrence," she said, and the way she said his name was the way someone says a word they've already decided means something smaller than it used to. "We appreciate the history here, we really do. But Thornfield is moving into a different model. Automated diagnostics, cloud-integrated monitoring, centralized scheduling. The role you're describing, it isn't really a role anymore. It's a process, and we've contracted that process out." He looked at her. He looked at the page in front of her. "The system you've contracted," he said, "doesn't account for the hydraulic variance on the line C press. It reads pressure output, not pressure behavior. There's a difference. Our technical team reviewed the specs." "I know the specs," he said. Not unkindly, just plainly. "I wrote the maintenance log that those specs were built from." There was a silence in the room. One of the older men shifted slightly in his chair. Nadine folded her hands on the table. "We're moving forward with the transition. Your last day will be the 30th. She paused. "You're a skilled person, Terrence. I'm sure you'll find something." He drove home on the highway with the folder on the passenger seat. The trees along the road had gone orange and yellow with the October cold, and the sky was the flat white of a day that had never quite warmed up. He thought about the Line C press. He thought about Abby's school photos that were sitting on the kitchen counter, not yet framed. He thought about the mortgage, which had 14 years left on it. He didn't stop at a Tim Hortons. He didn't call anyone. He drove home, pulled into the driveway of the small house in Elmvale that he had bought the year before his marriage ended, and sat in the truck for a long time. When he went inside, Abby was at the kitchen table working on a drawing of a horse. She was not good at horses yet, but she worked on them constantly and with great seriousness. "How was the meeting?" she asked without looking up. "Fine," he said. She looked up at that. She had her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness, and she was 7 years old and already knew when fine meant something else. "Okay," she said, and went back to the horse. He made them both grilled cheese sandwiches and didn't say anything else that night about it. For 6 weeks he looked for work the way he had always done things, thoroughly and without drama. He sent applications to 3 manufacturing plants within driving distance, had 2 interviews, and was told both times that they were going in another direction. He knew what that meant. He was not young enough to be cheap and not yet old enough to have a title that made the cost feel justified. He was the middle, and the middle was getting narrower. His sister Pamela called from Barry on a Thursday evening and told him he should retrain. Into what? He said. I don't know. Something with computers. I work with computers. Something that sounds like computers then. Something with a certificate. He didn't retrain. He thought about it. He thought about it the way you think about things when you already know you're not going to do them, which is carefully and for too long. What he did instead was go for a drive. It was a Sunday in November, gray and cold, and Abby was at her grandmother's for the day. He took the truck out along the county roads east of Elmvale, not looking for anything in particular, just thinking. He had always thought better when he was moving. He came to a property he'd driven past 100 times without stopping. A feed mill, built in the early 70s, closed since 2018. 3 acres, a main building with a steel frame that had held up through 6 hard winters, a secondary outbuilding, and a loading dock that faced a municipal road. There was a rusted chain across the gravel drive and a notice posted on the fence from the county. He stopped the truck and read the notice. The property had been sitting in a county receivership. The listed price was low. Low enough to make him look at it twice, and then a third time. Low because the interior had water damage from a failed roof section. Low because the zoning was agricultural industrial, and most buyers didn't know what to do with that. Low because it had been on the market for 2 years, and no one had come forward. He got out of the truck and stood at the chain, and looked at the building for a long time. He walked the fence line. He looked at the roof section. He looked at the loading dock and the road and the distance to the highway. He thought about something he had not allowed himself to think about for several years, which was the idea that had been sitting in the back of his mind since his 3rd year at Thornfield. A quiet and persistent idea about parts. The manufacturing plants in the region, not just Thornfield, but all of them, were dependent on outside suppliers for replacement components. Standard components, most of them. Bearings, seals, coupling assemblies, conveyor parts. The lead times were long. The markups were significant. When a line went down, the cost wasn't just the part. It was the hours the line sat idle waiting for the part. Terrence had thought for a long time about what it would mean to have a local supplier. Someone who stocked what the plants needed, who understood the equipment, who could get a part to a maintenance team the same day. He stood at the fence and looked at the feed mill. Then he got back in the truck, drove home, and called a real estate lawyer he'd met once at a hockey game. It took 4 months. 4 months of meetings and paperwork, and a loan application that required him to put the Elmvale house on the line, which he did not tell Abby about because she was 7, and because there was no version of that conversation that ended well. He spoke to 2 accountants. He spoke to a contractor who walked the mill building with him on a cold February morning, and told him the structure was sound, the roof section fixable, the electrical doable. If he was willing to do some of it himself, he was called the Operation Holt Industrial Supply. It was not a glamorous name. It was a name that said what the thing was, which was what he had always preferred. He spent March and April gutting the interior and rebuilding the storage layout himself on evenings and weekends, with help from his brother-in-law and a retired pipe fitter named Gordon, who lived 2 roads over, and had too much time and still enjoyed the work. He cataloged his opening inventory by hand, cross-referencing the equipment specs he had memorized over 11 years on the floor. He called 3 manufacturers directly and negotiated stocking arrangements. He built a simple website. He did not tell Thornfield what he was doing. There was no reason to. He also did not think particularly about Thornfield. He was busy. Abby came to the mill on a Saturday in May when the shelving was up and the first pallets of inventory had arrived. She walked through the building slowly, the way she walked through places she was thinking about seriously. She stopped in front of a row of cardboard boxes and read the labels with the concentration she normally reserved for the horse drawings. "Is this your store, Dad?" she asked. "It's a supply company," he said. "But you own it." "Yes." She thought about this. "Okay," she said. And then, can I name something? Like what? She pointed to the loading dock which he had repainted gray. The door. He looked at the door. Sure, she thought for a moment. Margaret, she said. He didn't ask why. He let Margaret be the name of the loading dock door. It seemed like a reasonable arrangement. Holt Industrial Supply opened for business on the first Tuesday of June. In the first week he had 4 customers. 2 maintenance supervisors he knew personally from previous work, a small fabrication shop in Midland, and a plant manager who had found the website and called on a Wednesday afternoon. By September, he had 17 regular accounts. He was not wealthy. He was not anywhere close to wealthy. He was working 14-hour days and sleeping 6 hours and eating whatever was fast and not thinking too hard about the house on the line or the loan schedule, or whether this was going to work. He was thinking about inventory and delivery times, and the hydraulic seals that kept going wrong for a plant in Penetanguishene, and whether he could source a better manufacturer. He did not think about Thornfield until Thornfield called him. It was a Thursday in October, exactly 1 year after the meeting in the boardroom. The call came from a production supervisor named Art, who had worked at Thornfield for 20 years, and who Terrence had always respected. "We've got a Line C situation," Art said without preamble. "The new diagnostic system flagged it as a minor fluctuation." "I don't think it's minor." Terrence knew what it was, without being told. "Hydraulic pressure behavior," he said. "Yep, when did it start?" 4 days ago. "You've got maybe 2 more days before it fails." There was a silence. "I know," Art said. "That's why I'm calling you." Terrence looked up the part. He had it in stock, had stocked it specifically because he had known, when he cataloged his opening inventory, that this was the part that Thornfield's new system would miss. He had not stocked it for this reason consciously. He had stocked it because it was the right part to stock. The effect was the same. He delivered it personally the next morning. He drove to the Dunmore Industrial Park in the same truck, pulled up to the same loading dock he had used for 11 years, and handed the part to Art in the parking lot like it was nothing. He invoiced Thornfield at his standard rate. He was not cheap, but he was fair, and he was there, and the line did not go down. Nadine Voss found out 3 weeks later when the invoice came across her desk. She read it twice. Holt Industrial Supply, Elmvale, Ontario. She looked up the website. She looked at the address and recognized the county road. She sat with it for a moment. Then she called her technical team and asked them why the automated diagnostic system had not caught the Line C fluctuation. They explained, with some difficulty, that the system read pressure output, not pressure behavior. She sat with that too. She didn't call Terrence. She didn't reach out. What she did over the following month was begin a quiet internal review of what the new diagnostic system had and hadn't caught in its first year of operation. The results were not comfortable. She shared them with the board, in a meeting she had not initially planned to have. The older board member, who had been in the room the previous October. A man named Gerald, who had said nothing during the entire meeting, but who had read the single-page Terrence had placed in front of him with more attention than he had shown, asked one question. What would it cost to establish a preferred supplier relationship with Holt Industrial? Nadine answered honestly. Less than what the downtime had cost. The letter arrived at the Elmvale Mill on a Thursday in November. It was a formal inquiry from Thornfield Manufacturing regarding a preferred supplier agreement. It outlined terms, volume projections, and a standing retainer arrangement. It was signed by Nadine Voss. Terrence read it at the folding table he used as a desk, next to a space heater and a half-finished mug of coffee. Outside it was snowing. The kind of heavy Ontario snow that came down straight and covered everything by morning. He read the letter twice. He set it down and looked at the ceiling of the mill, the repaired roof section, sealed now against 3 winters. He thought about the boardroom and the folder, and the way Nadine had folded her hands. He did not feel triumphant. He was not wired for triumph. What he felt, more precisely, was the particular quiet satisfaction of a thing going the way it was always going to go, if you gave it enough time and didn't stop working. He called Art first, to ask what volume he thought Thornfield would actually need in the first quarter. Art gave him the numbers. They talked for 20 minutes about the Line C press and what else the new system was probably missing. It was a good conversation. He wrote back to Nadine Voss the following Monday. He accepted the terms. He proposed 2 modifications to the retainer structure that made the arrangement more workable for a small operation. He was specific about delivery timelines and what he could and couldn't guarantee. He was not cold, but he was clear. Nadine accepted both modifications the same day. Gordon, the retired pipe fitter, showed up on a Saturday in December with a box of shortbread his wife had made and a theory about the inventory software that Terrence had been using, which Gordon felt was inefficient in a specific and correctable way. They spent 2 hours in the mill arguing about it, productively, and ended up with a better system. Abby came by that afternoon with her grandmother, who was picking her up from a birthday party down the road and had agreed to stop. Abby walked straight through to the loading dock and put her hand on the door. "Hi, Margaret," she said. Gordon looked at Terrence. "The door," Terrence explained. Gordon nodded, as if this was normal, which in the context of the mill it had become. Abby came back to the main floor and looked around at the shelves, which were fuller now than they had been in May, the boxes stacked with the kind of order that meant something was working. "It's bigger," she said. "A bit," he said. She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at the horse drawings, with an assessment that was more serious than the situation seemed to require. "Good," she said. And then she put her coat back on, because it was cold in the mill, and went to wait by the car. Terrence stood in the middle of Holt Industrial Supply, in the repaired and insulated and imperfectly lit space that had been a feed mill and a county liability, and a long drive on a gray November Sunday before it was this, and listened to the snow coming down on the roof. It did not leak.